Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to sell more books. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from people just like you and from the most successful authors on the planet. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of my new book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Michael Lachance. Michael is an artist and an author from a small town in Ontario, Canada. For the past 5 years, he's been a I can't even talk today. For the past 5 years, he's been a key team member at selfpublishing.com, really just a huge part of what we do at selfpublishing.com. He's been, one of the earliest employees and just a huge building block. And so he helps authors succeed and leads our author success team. Maybe if you're listening to this podcast and you've worked with him or the author success team, you've probably had a conversation with him or with his team if you're working with us. And in fact, he specifically over the years has had over 2,800 one-on-one calls and coaching conversations with authors. All right. He's also an author himself. He wrote a book called Land Your Dream Job. So join the 2% who make it past resume screening to land your dream job. Right. And so what I want to talk about here in this episode today is a couple things. So we'll obviously talk about Michael's experience as an author, lessons learned, all that good stuff, but then also Michael's experience on the front lines in the trenches with authors, right? Over 2,800 one-on-one calls that we can at least just track, right? Who knows how many more there is. And so what are those commonalities that if you're listening to this, whether you're working with us or not, will be some nuggets in there on challenges people face, what our most successful authors, what do they have in common? Our least successful authors. So we got a lot to get to. So we'll dive straight into it. Michael, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Chandler. I'm super, super, super excited about this opportunity and can't wait to have this conversation.
It's been a long time coming. So first off, why books? And I guess a two-part. Why did you decide to write the book that you wrote? And then why did you decide to work, to come join us and work at selfpublishing.com?
Yeah, great question. So it's kind of funny. Like I grew up in the before internet age, right? So, there wasn't like internet at home or like sitting and scrolling on your phone all the time. So my mom and my stepdad, we had two rules at home. It's either you go outside and play. And if you're staying inside, you're not going to sit inside and watch TV or anything like that. If you're going to stay inside, you're going to read a book or you're going to go do some art, paint, whatever. And so a lot of the time I would choose a book. And then so from a very young age, it was like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. And I just got into and immersed in these fiction worlds. And I just loved how authors could capture an idea, an experience, a concept in just literally just like a piece of paper. And I thought that was just a really cool idea of stamping an experience that you could then share with a whole bunch of people. So why writing a book? One of the things that I really appreciate about what you share with authors is, a book is really a $15 mentor. It's really the greatest minds sharing their greatest ideas or lessons learned. So it's just a fascinating way that you can learn from the best minds in the world at a very cheap kind of rate. And so all of this really inspired me from a young age to want to write a book. And that was really cool. Somebody I really respect brought me down to San Diego back in 2016. And I saw you speak for the first time on stage with Hal Elrod. And there was an activity there and it was start your mind map. And so I started doing my mind map. And I think at that point I was still in the fiction realm. So I started writing about my dog Stella at the time. And just but it just kind of started a bit of a snowball in terms of oh, I actually have a lot to write on this. This is actually a lot of fun. I really enjoy this. And so, yeah, I kept track of self-publishing school, now selfpublishing.com ever since. And an opportunity came up. I jumped on it. And it was the greatest decision I ever made. I was working in the automotive industry. I don't really like anything automotive, but I was a huge book nerd. So I was okay, this is a really cool opportunity. These people are teaching people how to write and publish books. This is my jam. I really want to work for these people. And so, yeah, that's how I first got connected with you and the team. So to answer your second question though, why this book? So in university, I worked in career services for a couple of years. And so I was having these conversations about like, how do I apply to a job? How do I explain my value from the degree that I'm going to school for? How does this relate to like a hiring manager? How do I design a cover letter? And I literally worked with like hundreds of people every single week, every single month over the course of years. And they were asking like the same question again and again and again and again. So I realized like after university, I still had this abundance of knowledge and experience answering those very specific type of questions. So when it came to, thinking of an idea to write my book on, it was like, well, I know a ton about this. I could easily write a book about this. There's 1,000 questions that I've answered on this before. So it was like a pretty, I think, easy decision for me to choose what my book was going to be about, just because I felt so confident and knowledgeable about it.
So a bunch of lessons to unpack there. I mean, first, the concept of a book is a $15 mentor. Talk about that all the time. I think you're a great example of a voracious reader. And as I've seen you learn and grow over the years, it's, hey, what books do you recommend? How can I get better in this? Okay, where's the books with that? And so you live that, but then also I think a lesson for people, if you're watching this, listening to this, what are the things that you just keep getting asked about that you're like, oh, I could just write this, right? And so that ultimately is what led to land your dream job. And obviously you've probably done dozens, if not hundreds of interviews for people wanting to work at selfpublish.com and now hired a bunch of people. And so it's kind of lessons from then the trenches within your job too. And so I think there's just like, I'm sure there's a lot of different avatars of people that will relate to that. And hopefully that says, oh, that's interesting. There's this thing that I'm doing that I didn't even think about that I could write a book about. Right. And so I guess, so that's why a book, that's why selfpublishing.com and working here and all that good stuff. How'd you do it? So specifically for Land Your Dream Job, how'd you successfully write and publish that book? And what was the toughest part?
Yeah. So it really started with putting together a mind map. And really a mind map is just like a brain dump of all the different things that come to your mind when you think about your book. So I've done literally hundreds, if not over 1,000 welcome calls with authors as they're getting started at selfpublishing.com. So like one of the main things that we talk about in preparation for an author's clarity call is who is your target audience and what problem are you helping them solve, right? So those are like two fundamental questions as you're getting ready to write your rough draft and create your outline, all that other stuff. It's just really crystallizing those two ideas. So I really wanted to make sure that with my book, I was answering and solving those two things. And sorry, Chandler, remind me, what was the second half of your question there?
Yeah. So what was the toughest part of going through the writing and marketing process for you personally?
Yeah. I knew I was getting there. So like the hardest part was like identifying who was, because like when I first started brain dumping and just like getting all the ideas onto the page, there's like 1,000 different degrees and like educational paths that people I was working with were going on. And so, I had a real difficult time trying to narrow in on like, who is my ideal target audience? Is it teachers? Is it, in the automotive? Is it, people working in a restaurant? Is it high school kids? Is it university kids? And so one of the hardest things that I had to really narrow in on was like, who truly is my target audience? And, just making sure that I was communicating the information and content in a way that was for that very specific target audience. Like one of the things I did in the first revision, because I actually relaunched my book, is I went super wide with my first book and wasn't getting like tangible enough action steps for my target audience in the first version. And so I really took a moment to kind of think through like, who am I really speaking for? Like who can I give the most value to? And really making sure that I was capitalizing on that and not trying to answer every single question that any, job seeker has ever had before. Because the book ultimately, like this applies to any book that you're writing. It's like your book is not for everyone. It should not be for everyone. There's a very specific avatar that you should be writing to when you're writing a book, right? And so I feel like sometimes, talking with a lot of authors on their welcome call as well, I'll hear that and they'll say, I'm writing this book for everybody. It's for, anybody aged 15 to 75 in every industry that they work in, and it's like, okay, cool, get that. Who can you really serve though? And really trying to like dig into that target audience. So that's just really like a crucial piece of getting started.
So narrow the avatar that you're writing to. Obviously, that's something that you've coached people up on as they're coming into the program and working through the process, and something you walked out yourself. One thing we talk about, and this is in my book, page 58, is the 4 Ps of a best-selling book, right? Person, pain, promise, price. And so obviously, Michael, what you were just speaking to is that the first P in the 4 Ps of a best-selling book is the person, and getting very specific on one person that you know that is that person, and then writing the book to that person. And so I love that you said narrow the avatar. Don't try to write to everyone. I think it's, probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see authors make. And the riches are in the niches. So you're going to think this is too small of an audience. But I mean, it's if you feel like it's probably because you've gotten specific enough. Yeah. What's Michael, for you, what's been the biggest thing that's sold the most books over the years?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Honestly, so I've kind of like stopped doing this. And there's a reason why, but the biggest thing was going through Amazon ads and creating like ads. So when I first was launching my book, I went like super, super, super wide. That was one of the things my coaches taught me, Lise. And she told me, just go super wide with your keywords. So what I mean by that is, when you're first setting up Amazon ads on Amazon for your book, you can select, I don't know if there's actually a limit or not, but you can select the number of keywords that you want to use to help, readers find your specific book. And so what I've seen done a lot of times is authors will start with maybe like 40, 50 words. And they think that's, a lot of words to start off as they're getting started with their Amazon ads. And so my coach kind of reset that, vision or expectation. She said, don't do 50 words for your Amazon ads. Start with like 600, right? Get hundreds of keywords, because you don't know what's going to work, what's not. So I went forward with that. I did a whole bunch of research in an Excel doc. It was like just an obnoxious amount of keywords. And then so the real action, the real thing that you want to do with that is run your ads for, the super wide ad set. Let the data run, right? Like let people not click on your keywords. So you get some really good data. So I let that run for a couple of weeks. And then you want to go back and kind of analyze two things. It's really simple as an idea. It's harder to execute, I think, but it's like what keywords are delivering results and what keywords are not. So it's like this constant focus of like optimizing and doubling down on the words that are working, and then just like trimming the fat of what's not. So I went through this process a couple of different times. I'd, run my ad set, get a whole bunch of data, remove 50%, maybe boost up the bid per different keywords, or just like find different ways to like include different variations of that keyword. And so just really trying to like find those niche kind of keywords. And just went through that process like probably 3 or 4 different times.
That's good. I like that. Well, that's cool. Thanks for sharing personal experience with your book. I want to dive into some of the calls and just like lessons learned from having a bunch of calls in the trenches with our authors. I guess before I do that, knowing what you know now, strictly based on your personal experience, what would be your advice from the Michael from years ago, or the advice from the other Michaels who are thinking about writing their first book?
Writing the first book. I think honestly, that's a really good question. I think honestly, it's finding accountability and community. Writing a book, it's such a lonely activity, or it can be, right? Like it's the activity that you're doing when it's dark out in the morning while the rest of the world is sleeping. It's you looking at a blank page. It's an activity that like you and you alone are moving forward 99% of the time, unless you're like co-authoring a book or something. But my biggest piece of advice is like connect with like-minded people who are also going through that experience together, because you don't know what you're going to learn from other people who are also going through the process. But B, I think the even bigger piece there is this is now not an individual kind of effort that you're doing alone in the dark. This is a community of people who are all working and striving towards the same goal and objective. So I think for me, before self-publishing school, if I wanted to write a book before I even knew this company existed, I would most definitely, whether that's an accountability partner, whether it's signing up to our program, just to be like literally immersed in thousands of people who are also writing and publishing a book. It's find that group of people who will support you, who will guide you, who will, kind of like a personal trainer does, give you that extra boost when you really need it, when you feel like giving up, you don't feel like you can do that extra rep. And that's where really like the community can really help drive results, get you to write and ultimately publish your book.
That's good. That's really good. And side note, before we talk about the all the lessons learned from all these coaching calls, I've always thought that you should do a sequel, or maybe not always thought, I was just thinking about this recently. You should do a sequel for your book that's skip the resume, get the job. about non-traditional ways to stand out in the hiring process and how to get, because you've got the one that's like, all right, here's how to make your resume better and to get past screening and all that stuff. But then there's that whole, as you've seen and we've seen, just hiring a bunch of people over the years, there's a lot of things outside of the resume that help you stand out and actually get the job.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I don't know, that's a hook for you.
This is part of that, like just being in the community. You never know what this could be another asset that I just have at the time. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about. I'm gonna write down that title real quick, just so I don't forget it. So you've done over 2,800 one-on-one calls with authors. Sometimes at I guess two main places. One is at the beginning of the journey and what we would call like a welcome call or orientation call. So you're one of and now really your team is one of the first people that someone talks to as soon as they've signed up and they're ready to get rolling in the process, right? And so there's those welcome calls. So you're seeing a lot of people at that beginning journey, which is, I think, is a unique moment in time itself. It's like right after you just committed and you've paid, and it's like, oh my gosh, am I really doing this? So there's that phase, but then you've also had a bunch of one-on-one conversations with people checking in, I guess oftentimes when they just need that nudge of, all right, they've been sitting on this rough draft for a while and they haven't finished, and we want to get them re-engaged, get them back in with the 8 milestones. And so we a lot of times call this like a milestone check-in call or something. So how can we help you take the next step? So two very different parts of the journey and probably everywhere in between. But I guess just zooming out globally of those calls, what do you feel like is the number one or maybe the top 1 or 2 challenges that you see our authors face throughout the process of getting their book done and published successfully?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The one that comes to mind immediately, and this is why we introduced the milestone check-in calls to begin with. Writing a book, we use this analogy quite a bit. Writing a book is a lot like running a marathon, but like running a marathon is really about a whole bunch of little steps along the way. So the biggest thing by far is authors coming in with very high expectations about what they can achieve in the next day, week, month, year, which is great. Like, I don't want to discourage big dreams and big goals. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say here, but it's the belief that, there's no feet in between the mile, right? So the goal and objective here, it's like, what is a actionable, specific, measurable goal that you can achieve, like between today and tomorrow, or between today and 9:00 p.m. So what is that thing that that you can get done? So rather than thinking about this as like, I need to write 30,000 words by the end of May, right? No, what is a goal that I can achieve today that I can do? So I'm gonna, achieve a big result for myself. I'm very clear about what my goal is. So I'm not looking at 30,000 words anymore. I might be looking at 500. And I think there's a lot of just momentum that is built from taking actions and setting goals like that. So it's not, it's that little step. Like, this book isn't going to be written, in seconds. This is going to take some work, right? And oftentimes what I've noticed is, the biggest point when authors start to get like kind of stuck or slowed up in the process is when they're not getting those little wins, right? Like when they're not hitting their daily writing goal. So I think one of the biggest things here, and I just give this as like encouragement to anybody listening, is set for yourself a goal that you can achieve. That was the other word I wanted to use earlier. Achievable goal that you can do today, right? And focus on achieving that. So try and bucket and just like break down your big goals into smaller chunks, really focus in and dive in on those, and then build up the wins over the course of days, weeks, months to knock out your rough draft or publish your book.
That's great. And I think a really great point, because, big goals are great, but not if they become a crippling force weighing down on you, right? If they're an inspirational beacon in front of you, awesome. But I think you're totally right, because I've obviously seen this with a bunch of our authors too, is when you have this crazy goal and then you fall short, then you start beating yourself up. You feel like, I'm not making any progress. Then you take a week or two off. Then it feels like, okay, it's this wheel that I've got to get pushed and moving again. And so often it's, if we can just get into the author, say, hey, what's the minimum, like the smallest thing that you can commit to every single day over the next week? Okay, is that 50 words a day? Great, right? 50 words a day. And just do that, but start to build those mini habits, and you'll start feeling a sense of accomplishment. And then now it feels like a totally different process that you're going through. So I love that advice. I hope you're loving this episode so far. So if you're serious about writing and publishing your book, we would love to chat with you and help create a custom plan. All right. So all you need to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. Schedule a 45-minute consultation with one of the experts on my team. All right. Let's implement what you're learning in this episode and let's see how we can help with your book. Go to selfpublishing.com/schedule. I want to zoom in on maybe were you about to say something?
Yeah, just real quick. So Allison is awesome. So she's running a lot of our welcome calls right now. She's fantastic. And she shared this thing at a recent offsite. And sometimes authors are really struggling, like, is 500 words too little? Like what should that actionable goal be? And so she just said, can you write 3 words today? Like just as simple as that. Can you write 3 words today? Well, yeah, of course I can write 3 words, but those are like the kind of like small wins that really help build up momentum and just like compounding interest, if you will, in the long-term kind of like vision and goal of your book. So no goal is too small if it's achievable and moving you in the right direction.
That's good. So let's zoom in on the welcome call and the starting point. Obviously, I don't even know how many hundreds, if not over 1,000 of those that you've done over time. I guess at the starting line for a lot of our authors. What do you see on those calls? What kind of emotions are you seeing? And what are the biggest challenges that you see people facing in that moment that keeps them from getting started?
Yeah, kind of alluding back to my earlier ideas that I shared there, but it's almost like you've got 2 groups of people almost. One group of people are just like crazy excited to finally be doing the thing that they've been thinking of doing for months, for years, for decades. I've talked to some authors who have like been wanting to write and publish their book for like 25 years. And they're just so excited that they finally made that commitment to like, I'm going to do this thing now. And so when they get into the welcome call, it's like, this is the biggest step that I've just made toward the success of my book. This is huge. So that's one group of people. And then the other group is more of like that deer in headlights look, where it's like, okay, I just did make this decision. This is a very big goal. This is Mount Everest is way up there. The peak's really high. How am I going to get there? And then so, my biggest piece of advice at that point is again, just like, what is the one little goal that we can focus on today? There's really 2 things. What is the small little goal that I can focus on today to move you forward? But then 2, it's how it's kind of like the same thing, but it's like, what things can I remove from my thought process that is getting in the way of me taking action? So rather than looking at the full mountain, it's like we don't need to think about book marketing. We don't need to think about book cover. We don't need to think about ads. We don't need to think about Amazon. What are the things that we can cut out? Because we really just want to focus on, like, right now, your one goal is the mind map. That is the milestone. Until the milestone is done, you're not going to move to your outline. Until you're done your outline, you're not going to move to your rough draft. So I think, it's really clarifying what that next milestone is, what the next goal is, and then just giving like permission, if you will, to cut out the rest, because a lot of people come in, they've got all these questions about every single part of the writing process. And so sometimes it's a little bit like, but I want to do so much. Like, I have all these questions. I'm really excited to actually launch my book, but it's like, totally get that. That's amazing. I'm really excited for you. What's the one thing that's going to get us closer there? Because if that happens, like, the rest of it isn't going to happen. Yeah,
that's so fantastic. And for those who aren't familiar with this, and if you're watching the YouTube video, turn to page 17 of the book. It's in the book. It's in our programs. It's also, if you just go to my book published and look on the Amazon page, you can see this image that I'm referencing. But the process is 8 milestones. And so the process that Michael's talking about, which I think is really important, we try to help people just, what's the next milestone? Right? The mind map, the outline, rough draft. So the first 4 are the more writing method. So mind map, outline, rough draft, editing, right? And so how do you finish the next milestone? And until you get there, nothing else matters. And so I love that, almost the addition and the subtraction that you're communicating on that first call is like, okay, what are we adding? What's the habit that we can commit to? And then what are we subtracting? Which is, we're not going to think about it. We're not going to watch videos on it. We're not going to skip ahead to it. We're only going to focus in the here and now. I think that's a really great kind of focusing point. For author, it's almost like you've done this 1,000 times.
I literally have. And sometimes like the cutting out piece is like, hard for people to hear, right? Because like,
Yes.
I've been
Oh
thinking
my
about this
gosh,
for so long.
yes.
It's like, but what do you mean? Like, I came to you, you're the expert. You should know the answers to all these things. And it's like, trust me, I am the expert here. And this is the expert path, if you
Saving it
will.
from yourself.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's truly what it comes down to.
Now, I want to talk about kind of some commonalities and type of authors that we've worked with, and on the successful side and on the unsuccessful side. So let's start with our most successful authors. You've been here for years, so you've had kind of the blessing of not just saying, hey, good luck, and then you don't get to see it, but you actually get to see kind of full circle stories that you were on the first call with them, which is so cool. But what are some of the commonalities, maybe 2 or 3, that you see of our most successful authors?
Yeah. I think the first one that comes to mind, so you need to be coachable, right? Because like right off the bat, we've got a process that we've refined over years, over thousands of authors that really works, right? So that's number 1. 2 is understanding what their outcome is, what their ideal goal is, right? So and what I mean by that is the most successful people know exactly who they're writing their book to, right? They know exactly what problem they're helping solve. And then so that removes, honestly, a lot of the guesswork involved in terms of what should I include in my book? What should I not include in my book? How do I know when my rough draft is done? How do I not know when my rough draft is done, right? And so, obviously we help a lot. We help with the kind of like the thought process behind that with our coaching, right? Is like really trying to narrow in on that target audience and the problem that we're helping them solve. But that would be number 2. I think honestly, those are the 2 most, actually, I'll throw in a third one. A very give first mentality. Okay. And so what I've noticed in the community with some of our most successful authors, they're like very pay it forward. They're like the go-giver people, where it's like, they're not only here to receive, but they're also here to give. And there's just such a power and community and value and reciprocity that comes from being like the go-giver person inside of the group. And so you'll notice those people, Carol Wiley is one that comes to mind immediately, Leslie Davis, they're always trying to like give first inside of the community, always there to support
encouraging people.
Always encouraging people. And these are authors who have published like multiple books, right? They've been there, they've done that. And I think like, just by them getting more involved and being like, give first, it really just helps other authors, but it also really helps them because there's that element of reciprocity.
Yeah. Now, what about our least successful authors? What are the common traits and things that either derail people or they just don't have success? Like, what are the things that people listening to this or watching this can avoid if they want to have success with their book? Yeah,
I think there's maybe one or 2 key traits. It's kind of the flip side of the first one, being uncoachable. And I know that that's kind of like a harsh word in my opinion. But I guess what I mean by that is like, I've worked with some authors who have came into our program and they're incredibly set in terms of like what they want their cover to look like, what their book is going to be like, who they're writing it to, the action that people are going to take after their book. And, there's almost like this disconnect between like the content that you're including in your book and who you're writing it to, and kind of like the outcome that you're hoping to get and receive by publishing the book. And, we're here for a really good purpose and we've helped literally thousands of people through this process. So I think like the biggest thing that stands out is just like totally understanding there's just going to be like a little bit of give and take, and kind of like understanding where our expertise really comes in to help you maximize the impact that you want to have through our expertise. So I think that's just a really big one. And it's just being like, and it's okay for authors to ask, well, why do you recommend that? Why should I not do this? Why should I do that? Right? Like, this is why you're here, is to learn. But I think like, it's that Ted Lasso quote. I knew I had to throw Ted Lasso in here somewhere. It's actually a Walt Whitman quote, but be curious, not judgmental. Right. So it's just learning to be a little bit more curious about the book publishing process and why we're recommending certain things, because there's a lot of reasons behind it. There's a lot of experience and like decades worth of experience behind some of the things that we're recommending. So I think that would honestly be the biggest one.
That's a good one. And, we've seen this play out a lot where people come in and they're like, well, I want it this way. It's like, well, why did you hire us? We have seen this play out thousands of times. Obviously, we've published thousands and thousands and thousands of books. And so, but I love the curious, not judgmental, because I think we have to make sure that we're doing that on our side just as much as they do, right? Because there's definitely preferences that the author has, which is like, all right, we want to honor those preferences and also challenge them to make sure that they're truly doing what's going to set their book up for success. And so I think that it's that nice and fun balance. And I love the Ted Lasso. Season 3's out. I haven't started watching it yet.
Oh, you're missing out.
I know.
So good.
Big Ted Lasso fan as well. So final question or two, and then we'll wrap up. Knowing what you know now from your thousands of calls with authors and your personal experience, what would be your parting piece of advice for people who are thinking about going on this journey, or maybe they just joined and they're listening to this episode?
Yeah. I think so. This, I think, applies to people who haven't yet signed up, who are interested, but also people who are currently going through the process. It's give and take from both like our side and the author's side, but just really like what's your very next step? I always come back to this philosophy, and it's something that I've like not done well enough in the past, but it's like the author, here's your very next step. Like, this is what you need to do next. And then also, if the author is kind of unsure what we're going to be doing for them, it's that like, okay, what is your very next step in terms of this relationship? Like how are you going to be supporting me in this process too? So I think, it's so fundamentally important that we've got a plan of action in place. Like, whether you've talked to a member on our team that, maybe didn't sign up right away. What's your very next step after you have that phone call with somebody on our team? What is your next step? Like, clearly this book was super important for you. You have a passion for it. You made a decision to have a phone call with us. So if you're not going to sign up, what is your next step? Is it to dive into our content, get started on your mind map, et cetera? And even for authors that are currently in the program, and this is something that I really try and do at the end of all of my calls, is like, okay, here's our very next step. Like, here's the very next thing that we're going to be doing after this phone call. And then so it's like the fog of war is kind of like removed, because you know that you're moving toward a destination. You might not see the destination yet. It might be pretty far off, but like, this is the very next step that's going to help you get there. So I think that would be like, no matter where you're at in the process, is what is your very next step?
That's great.
Yeah,
that's really great. And that's something that Sean and I, similar, not quite as succinct as that question, which I love, but talk about on the group coaching call for the Author Advantage Accelerator authors is, all right, we always start out with, hey, what's your number one win or thing from the last week that you're proud of? And then always end with, hey, what's your number one goal for the next week? Or what does success look like for the next week? What's your number one goal? So kind of having that mentality, or building that habit of, all right, celebrate the win, get clear on the next step or the goal for the next week. Celebrate the win, get clear on the goal for the next week. And it's the cadence that I think works really well for our authors, and a cadence that works really well internally for our team, and all that good stuff. So last question, Michael, you're pulling double duty at Author Advantage Live. You got some awards that you're going to be announcing with some of our authors, which is really exciting. And then you're also giving a talk. So what are you speaking about at Author Advantage Live, and why should people get a ticket and show up?
Yeah, so I'm super excited. I've been to a couple of Author Advantage Lives, both in person and a year virtual, but this is an amazing experience. So yeah, the award ceremony is amazing. So what we do there, just real quick, is we are helping tons of authors publish their books like every single week. And so one of the things that we'd like to do is to help authors promote themselves and their book to a wider audience, is we do a cover contest. So best design cover. So we do a bit of like voting internally, and then we also ask the community for a little bit of guidance and support. And ultimately we leave it to attendees to vote on their favorite cover. Usually it's between 4 or 5 different covers. So that is a really exciting thing. And then my other talk here is starting with the end in mind with your author brand. Right. So kind of, you said this earlier, but like, what is your definition of success? Like, what does success look like? So it's really starting with that like fundamental question before you start building the blueprint, the house, right? So it's like, whenever you're building a house, you start with the blueprint first. You're defining what success looks like. So I think in this similar way, it's like when you're building out your author brand, you're starting with that end in mind, and then you're doing, the very next steps to help you get closer to that author brand. So it should be really, really amazing.
Lots to look forward to. You're going to miss it if you don't have a ticket and you don't show up for Author Advantage Live. Guys, we'd love to have you there. If you haven't heard about it, it's our 3-day live virtual experience happening in June. Ticket prices are going up real soon. And hopefully you're seeing this or hearing this before the event, so there's still time to get a ticket. Go to authoradvantagelive.com and grab a ticket. Okay. authoradvantagelive.com. There's general admission, there's VIP. pick the one that works best for you. But no matter what you do, get a ticket, get in that room. It's the power of getting in a room with people that are like-minded, that have similar goals, right? It's a virtual experience. So we've made it as easy as possible for you to attend. All you have to do is, we've made the tickets super cheap and really affordable. And all you have to do is get one and show up. So hopefully we'll see you there at Author Advantage Live. Michael, last question. Where can people go to grab a copy of your book?
Yeah, let's go. So 2 different ways. So if you go to amazon.com or .ca, because I'm Canadian, shout out Canada, and land your dream job. This is the cover that you're looking for right here. Alternatively, if you go to facebook.com/land your dream job, you'll see a couple of different like posts and templates that I include in the book that you can start taking action on today.
All right. And if you're listening, so you can't see it, it's a bullseye with an airplane. That's your resume. All right. So the book's called Land Your Dream Job. Grab a copy. Grab a ticket for Author Advantage Live, and we'll see you there. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks so much, Chandler.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.